So, hello everyone. Salam, Namaste, Nada from Delhi, India. Welcome you all. And today we are going to hear Professor Irfan Ahmad, Professor of Anthropology, Sociology at Ibn Haldun University, Istanbul, Turkey. And he will be formally introduced by Ilham Ibrahim, who is a graduate student of sociology at the same university. And concluding remarks will be given by Professor Amarjeet Singh, who has still not joined, but we hope that he will be joining soon. And welcome you all. And Professor Irfan is a very well-known expert in the field, and he has written extensively. His articles are plenty, and three books are part of the poster here. And I'll now, rather than going more in detail, I'll rather invite Ms. Ilham Ibrahim to do a formal introduction of Professor Irfan Ahmad. So thank you all. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Razi. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. I also wish to welcome you to this, I think, very pertinent and exceptionally timely talk that we will have by Professor Dr. Irfan Ahmad. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with our esteemed professor here, you'll know to anticipate a lot of depth and insight from the professor. Dr. Irfan is as Razi sir had mentioned, that he is a professor of sociology and anthropology at Ibn Haldun University, but his impressive academic career includes being the senior research fellow, for example, at Max Planck Institute for the study of religious and ethnic diversity in Göttingen, Germany. Prior to that, he was associate professor of political anthropology at the Institute for Religion and Critical Inquiry, Faculty of Theology and Philosophy at ACU in Melbourne, Australia. And of course, before that, he was a senior lecturer in politics at Monash University in Australia, where he taught for nearly 5 years. He has also taught in Utrecht University and the University of Amsterdam. So that is a very, concise way of trying to introduce the esteemed professor. But I personally, as a student at the university in Istanbul at Ibn Haldun University, I have personally gained much from Dr. Irfan and his mentorship. I've been privileged not only to take a graduate course with Professor Irfan, but I've also received much academic guidance from him as well. And in fact, it was his graduate course entitled The Ethnography of the State that I was able to really find my own field of research personally. But as you know, as a political anthropologist from India, Dr. Irfan has shed insights on the complex interplay of historical narratives and cultural perceptions and political ideologies that are in Indian society. Just to kind of preface this talk a little bit, I hope to give a little bit of depth and insight to the audience here on the piece that Dr. Irfan has written. In recent times, India has been witnessing this concerning emergence of what some have labeled as fascism, authoritarianism, ultranationalism, and even the erosion of democratic values, democratic institutions, marking this shift in the socio-political society that has garnered significant attention and has sparked widespread debate. This resurgence is characterized by a complex interplay of historical narratives, cultural perceptions, and political ideologies, which have emerged and gained traction within the nation's socio-political landscape. The confluence of these forces has led to the polarization of the socio-political climate of India, where identity politics and historical revision and even select reinterpretations of the cultural heritage of that society have become increasingly prevalent. In understanding and addressing these elements that I've just touched on, it necessitates a nuanced examination of the historical context, the socio-political dynamics, and the complexities of the various factors at play within this country's diverse tapestry. Dr. Irfan's piece entitled "Why Hindu Orientalism" supremely demonstrates the necessity of this nuance in framing and also restating Orientalist tendencies in contemporary Indian religious cultural politics. And his piece situates this deep knowledge power configuration, which Dr. Irfan will delve more into, but this power configuration that exists in the working of Hindu Orientalism. For those of you who Orientalism might be a bit of a new topic, it is a concept that was popularized by the esteemed scholar Edward Said, and it refers to a Western construction of the East as an exotic, backward, and monolithic other. And by way of drawing from Halak's Restating Orientalism, Dr. Irfan in this piece proposes that Hindu Orientalism as a central category of analysis akin to that of Halak's description of Israeli Orientalism through the case of Dalits, tribes, and Muslims to illustrate how Hindu Orientalism actually operates. With that being said, I wish to give the floor to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Irfan, to indulge us further on this topic of why Hindu Orientalism. Please, Dr. Irfan.
Thank you. You guys can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction, Ilham, and I want to thank Indian Diaspora Washington, D.C. for this venue to present my work. In particular, I'm thankful to Dr. Razi Sahab, who is based in Washington, D.C., but probably at the moment he is in Delhi. Now, without taking much of your time, let's get to the business. So why Hindu Orientalism as a concept? So I wear many hats. One of them is as philosophical anthropology of ideas, or how anthropology can contribute to the understanding of concepts and terms that we use both in our everyday life as well as in academic discourse. So the way I think of my intellectual intervention, it is grounded in a particular kind of philosophy. And here, many of you will recall what is philosophy by Deleuze and Guattari, the French philosophers. And their mode of intervention in philosophy, as Deleuze and Guattari says, is that knowledge advances by creating new concepts. And I think this is a very pertinent insight. The advancement of knowledge is by creation and invention of new concepts. But unlike Deleuze and Guattari, the concept of Hindu Orientalism that I came up with, it arose out of restlessness at midnight as much as out of uproar at the noon. Now, this concept, and I will elaborate it, what it means and why it is important. But the first point to note it is this, that we need this concept because I think there is a disjunction between our conceptual vocabulary and the phenomenon which is in front of us. And by this, I mean not simply the present, but also the past. So I think the vocabulary that we use and the reality that we face, they are not in conjunction with each other. So point is that our old vocabulary is not adequate. It is not relevant to understand what is happening now, and through the prism of the present, we have to also look at the past. The idea of Hindu Orientalism, and this is a major point, is this, that we should not be looking at it in terms of party politics, that it is exclusive to one political party or one formation. It is a supra-party ideology. It informs Congress as much as BJP as it does to Aam Aadmi Party or even different faction of the Communist Party. So it is a supra-political knowledge formation. The third point to note is this, that Hindu Orientalism, unlike Edward Said's formulation, which was predominantly in the realm of textuality, I take it as a much, much wider phenomenon which is of course there in text, in books or in reportage, but it goes beyond that. It informs administrative setup. It, according to Halak, which I will come to later, it is also a key player in field as different as engineering, management, and so on and so forth. So the concept of Hindu Orientalism is a supra-textual thing. It also informs our everyday life. It is not simply national. It is international, and it pervades a wide variety of our areas of our life, including language, film, food, even the designation of spaces that we have. Now, having said this, there is another catalyst to my intervention here as political anthropologist, and it is this. The concept of Hindu Orientalism becomes important because in recent times, there has been call issued by different actors, including politicians like the education minister, who said that he wants to decolonize Indian studies. Okay? Now, that is a call issued by a politician, but it has also been issued by academics, journalists, some of whom I want to name here. It is a banker turned historian called Vikram Sampath, J.S. Deepak, a well-known scholar of Hinduism based in Canada, Arvind Sharma. So these people have talked about the need to decolonize Indian studies or understanding of India. My argument here is that most of these calls issued to decolonize India or decolonize Indian studies, in fact, they are instances of Hindu Orientalism, and it is far, far away from any conception of decolonization that we have. A related point is that if we want to understand contemporary India, there are many ways in which scholars as well as journalists and popular intellectuals have understood it. The dominant explanation seems to be that in order to make sense of contemporary India, those who are critical of the current dispensation, they think that a way out is to go back to the so-called great past of Nehru and Gandhi. And behind this assumption is that the contemporary India is a departure from the golden past of Nehru and Gandhi. My argument is that it is not a departure, it is a transformation, a continuation rather than a departure. So with this formulation of my argument, I just want to say now how I will proceed. I will first begin with a brief description of what is Orientalism, and then I will describe what is Hindu Orientalism. Now, to illustrate it, I will give two examples. One is from the history and politics of Islam and Muslims in India, and another one from Adivasis or tribes, that how these two sites, Islam and Adivasis, they illustrate the working of Hindu Orientalism. And I will conclude with some concrete examples of how Hindu Orientalism is not simply a textual reality, but how it also informs our day-to-day life. Now, I suppose for this audience, which probably includes people from university background, but also those from outside of the university. So let me just say something which is obvious and well known, that of course Edward Said did not invent the concept of Orientalism. The concept existed, but it became more popular and part of academic vocabulary with the publication of his book called Orientalism in 1979. Now, the theoretical intervention of Edward Said was he weaved together Foucault and Gramsci, the French philosopher and the Italian Marxist. From Foucault, he got the concept of knowledge-power nexus. From Gramsci, he borrowed the idea of hegemony. And by weaving them together, his point was how knowledge and power coexist. Okay? With this formulation, he showed how modern knowledge, especially from the Western Europe, it has been at the service of power, and it would say it focuses on the Orient in general, but his special treatment is to the Middle East. Now, there are so many things which it would say says in that book, but for our purpose, it would be good to condense it. So the way or the mechanism of working of this Orientalism in Edward Said's text is this, that the key mechanism of Orientalism is by way of contrast and polarity. Now, what does it mean? So the modern West, conceptually, it rests on binary production. Now, what is that binary production? The binary production is this: modern versus traditional, developed versus backward, spiritual versus materialist, active versus stuck, and civilized versus barbarians. So these were the conceptual mechanism of Orientalism. In short, we can say that at the heart of Orientalism as a discourse is the dynamic between self versus other. Now, if we want to take an example from India, and I've chosen this example deliberately, which may not be congenial to some, I suppose, is that you can see the mechanism of this contrast and polarity in the work of Vivekananda, who died in 1902. So he made a call for synthesis of Hinduism and Islam, but he depicted Hinduism as a spirit and Islam as a body. So many people think that, okay, this is a nice gesture because he wants to bring Hinduism and Islam together, but what is probably not sufficiently taken into account in Orientalist understanding of Vivekananda, he already has a hierarchy that Hinduism is the spirit, the Atma, and Islam is simply a physical body. So once you bring them together, it is not an symmetrical synthesis. It is a hierarchical synthesis, right? But what this synthesis does is to keep this polarity or binary between a spirit on the one hand and the body or the material on the other. Okay, so this is if one were to identify the central mechanism of how Orientalism works, this is how I would put it. Now, Edward Said wrote that book in 1978, and there has been quite a significant number of books which have been written in support of Edward Said, but also as critique of Edward Said. It is not possible in this talk to summarize all these criticism, but one notable theoretical intervention about Edward Said's book, an argument was made by Wael Hallaq in 2018 in his book called Restating Orientalism. This book, in my view, is very critical because of its deep theoretical signification. So what Hallaq does, that he critiques Edward Said and he wants to go beyond the theoretical horizon of Edward Said. Now, this book is also complex. I will not be in a position to do full justice in this talk, but the one which is relevant here, Haldun says that the identification of knowledge power matrix by Foucault is very salient, but what is missing in the discourse by Foucault is this, that he never bothered to inquire if there is another culture where the dynamic of power knowledge nexus operates differently. Okay, in other words, what Haldun does, he takes a comparative approach, and unlike Foucault, he asks, what was the knowledge power dynamic in pre-modern Islamic tradition or Islamic societies? Okay, Foucault doesn't do that. So through this comparative examination, Haldun presents an alternative portrait of the knowledge power dynamics in Muslim social formation. And there, and he goes into the Ottoman history, he goes partly also in Indian history, in the history of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and Malaysia. His larger conclusion is this, that unlike the identification of knowledge power metrics by Foucault in modern social formation, what we see in the pre-modern social formation, that there is a different kind of dynamic operating in pre-modern Islamic tradition and history, where knowledge is not at the service of power. There is a considerable autonomy of knowledge from power. And therefore, it sheds light on how knowledge power metrics, as it has been viewed and theorized in the modern social formation, it shows a different picture altogether in pre-modern formation. So this is one critical intervention by Haldun. The second critical intervention is that partly in agreement with, but partly going beyond Edward Said, he identifies the practice of what he calls Israeli Orientalism. And he says that this Israeli Orientalism, it is derived from Western Orientalism, and the culture, politics, and the history of Israeli Orientalism is important to understand the situation of Middle East at large. So I take the identification of the concept of Israeli Orientalism from Haldun, and I argue that there is an analogous practice of Hindu, or what I call Hindu Orientalism. Okay? So this is my engagement with Haldun. Now, but this engagement with Haldun is also a critique of Haldun. Now, let me say why I critique Haldun. So, in his book, Restating Orientalism, without any evidence, in many places, Haldun cites the example of China and India as discourses which are counter to regnant Western Orientalism. He doesn't furnish any evidence, okay? But that probably is a minor point. A major point is that in his book, there is no mention of Sheldon Pollock, okay? And Sheldon Pollock is important because long before intervention by Haldun, Sheldon Pollock has written a very powerful chapter. And in that chapter, Sheldon Pollock identified the working and premise of a different knowledge power matrix in pre-modern Hindu social tradition. Okay? And there, his key argumentation is this, that in pre-modern Hindu social formation, you see an intimate knowledge power connection. And this knowledge power connection is bolstered and emboldened by Hindu religious practices. So he examines many Sanskrit texts, religious codes, which are called nibandhs, and he finds an organic link between knowledge and domination in pre-modern Hindu social formation. Now, the key dimension of this knowledge power matrix in pre-modern Hindu social formation is the monopolization of knowledge and literacy by twice-born varnas/caste, which religiously speaking, they are known as dvijas. So monopolization of knowledge and literacy by the twice-born varnas and caste, and their denial to the Shudras. Now, Sheldon Pollock, he said his argument is that this was rationalized by biogenetics, notion of purity, as well as by the Veda and other texts. And as a result of which you see production and circulation of a different kind of binaries and polarity, which was manifest in many registers. Let me give you just two examples, Aryan versus non-Aryan, or Aryan versus Malecha. And this binary was at the core of that knowledge power dynamic in pre-modern Hindu social formation. Now, Pollock uses the term called indigenous or Indian Orientalism. So please keep in mind that his focus is not modern social formation, pre-modern social formation. So in pre-modern social formation, he already identifies indigenous Indian Orientalism. Now, unlike Pollock, I don't use the term indigenous or Indian. I instead use the term called Hindu Orientalism. And we can have a discussion if people would have questions about it as to why I'm calling Hindu Orientalism not Brahminical Orientalism or something else, okay? That is open for debate. But the point is this, unlike Pollock, I take it primarily as a modern phenomenon, though it does decisively draw on pre-modern religious traditions and idiom. So this is one point of difference. The second is, unlike Pollock, I focus on international relations, understanding of democracy, nationalism, and other modern practices. Now, as a result of this, in my conceptualization, if you weave all these factors together, then it becomes as an ideological project. And in this ideological project, the notion or the idea of Hinduism becomes as a core. And if you want to use the word, as an axis to organize society, culture, power, and almost every dimension of social and political life. So if you view Hindu Orientalism in this sense, then it is not simply national, it is also regional. Now, if you ask me what is the example of that regional dimension of Hinduism, Hindu Orientalism, it is the idea of Akhand Bharat. Now, those of you who might think of Akhand Bharat as simply undivided India, that is not the actual meaning of Akhand Bharat. Akhand Bharat means undivided India, emptied of the presence of invading religion and practices. Okay? And therefore, it is also international. So this by and large is my point of theoretical entry into the debate on Orientalism, and how and why I think the concept of Hindu Orientalism is important. Now, to move to the case study of Islam and Muslims, and later on I will focus on Adivasis. So let's begin with how Hindu Orientalism operates in relation to Islam and Muslims. Now, in my view, the first key text of this practice appeared soon after the Battle of Plassey, which happened in 1757. And as you know, in the Battle of Plassey, Siraj-ud-Dawla was defeated by the British. Now, after that defeat, William Watts, who was a member of East India Company, British East India Company, and he was also a soldier in that battle, but also a scribe. He wrote, and I want to quote here because this is very crucial. So we are talking about a period soon after the Battle of Plassey, so 1750s. So this is William Watts, and I will quote, "The two great nations differ widely in their complexion, languages, manners, and religion. The Mughals are a robust, a stately, and in respect to the original natives, a fair people. They are naturally vain, addicted to luxury, fierce, oppressive, and for the most part, very rapacious. The Gentoos, or native Indians, are industrious than the Moors." Moors is the name for Muslims. "They are mild, subtle, frugal race of men, exceedingly superstitious, submissive, but naturally jealous, suspicious, which is principally owing to that abject slavery they are kept in by the Moors," meaning Muslims. Now, what you see here, let's get back to the key mechanism of Orientalism, which I described earlier, that the production and circulation of polarity. So what William Watts in this quote that I gave you does, he creates a polarity in which Mughals / Moors / Muslims, they become invaders, outsiders, oppressive, prone to violence, militant, and Hindus are described as mild, subtle, frugal race of men, and they have been put under abject slavery by the Muslims. So this is a classic example of, you see, those of us who have been colonized, we always say that colonialism thrived or walked on the basis of divide and rule. This is true, but what we miss here, it is not sufficient, as Mahmoud Mamdani has very fruitfully described. We have to talk not simply about divide and rule, but we have to also take into consideration define and rule. Because without a definition, because what definition does, that it creates powerful categories and terms, okay? So definition is at the service of division and then the rule. So what William Watts does, he already creates this powerful narrative of concepts and categories, which, as I will show you, permeates the Indian vocabulary from mid-18th century until now. So if you move, and this is quite a long journey, but this is how we have to do it in 45 minutes of talk. In 2014, the Prime Minister on the floor of the Parliament, he described Muslims as outsider and their period of rule as 1200 years of servitude. The word that he used was gulami. Now, my point is, to the extent that the Prime Minister has an agency of his own, it might be his own agency, I don't dispute it, but this agency will not make any sense unless it is related to the discourse which is already put in place by William Watts in 1750s. Okay, it is simply a re-articulation, or if you want to use the word, a reassertion of the idea of this binary polarity. Now, this was something which was put in place by William Watts, but it becomes integral, a core to the Indian / Hindu political ideology. Now, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who is considered as the key figure of Renaissance, okay, he would describe Mohammedan rule as despotic, and Muslims as outsiders, and Hindus as natives. So from William Watts through Raja Ram Mohan Rai to 2014 in Parliament, you see this production and circulation of binary opposition, which is at the heart of Hindu Orientalism. Now, as someone like myself, who is interested in philosophy as well, in the discipline of anthropology, you can think of people like Iravati Karve, Shamacharan Dubey, my own teacher, Yogendra Singh, but also a very famous French anthropologist called Lévi-Strauss, who toured India and Pakistan soon after World War II, and he wrote a book in French. My French is not very good, so pronunciation is odd. I will give you the English translation. It is called The Sad Tropics. And in that book, Lévi-Strauss, as a French anthropologist, he does the same thing, what William Watts has already done in 1750s. So this is one register of Hindu Orientalism working in the case of Islam. Now let's shift to tribes or Adivasis. Now, who are India's original inhabitants? Okay. Now there is a fierce debate. Okay. Now, caste Hindus who claim to be Aryan in the tribal discourse, actually they are foreigners. And mind you, Neeraj C. Chaudhary, and those of you who have read his autobiography called An Autobiography of Unknown Indian, he dedicated his book to the memory of the British Empire. He thought that his original home is not India. He said, since he's an Aryan who came from outside, he said that my true home is Southern Russia, Central Asia. Okay. Now that discourse is being put upside down in the last 10, 15 years. Okay. But what you have here is to look at this two key concepts, Adivasis and then Vanvasi. So when you say Adivasi, Adi in Sanskrit and Hindi means for a long time. Okay. So Adi is a temporal concept in the BJP and RSS discourse explicitly, but in the Congress discourse implicitly. Adivasis are known as Vanvasi. So what this term does, that it undermines the temporality or the temporal dimension of tribes as original inhabitants and places them as Vanvasi. So it makes a shift from time to a space, saying that, okay, these are people who reside in one, meaning forest, right? Now, if you look at the discourse vis-a-vis Adivasis from 1871 until 1911, in the official census, they were described as primitive. From 1921 until 1941, the religion of Adivasis people, they were called as tribal. Now, after India's independence, or if you want to use the term transfer of power, which makes a lot of conceptual shift. So after the transfer of power in 1951, the religion of tribes, which was earlier described as primitive and tribal, it becomes Hindu. And this is already an example of Hindu Orientalism now in power, trying to assimilate diverse population under its own umbrella, if that is the correct term. Now, this is more in the political realm. Now, in academic field and as an anthropologist, so you see the so-called father of Indian sociology now, in 60s and 70s, nobody described Govind Sadashiv Ghuriye as father of Indian sociology. It was Patrick Geddes, but now he is considered as father of Indian sociology, G.S. Ghuriye. He wrote a book which is called The Aborigines, So-Called, and Their Future. Okay? So you have to remember this term that I described earlier, Adivasis versus Vanvasi. So he doesn't think that these are Aboriginal population, and therefore he puts in the title of the book itself, the so-called. Okay? And what happens, G.S. Ghuriye, he in sociological discourse, he begins to describe Adivasis as backward Hindus. Okay? There is no historical or anthropological evidence to describe their culture or religion as Hindu, but he describes them as backward Hindus. And this was a position which was also taken by D.N. Majumdar, later on Nirmal Kumar Bose. My point is not that they did it identically. There are differences, but in the ultimate analysis, their goal was to assimilate them into an imagined idea of a Hindu nation and Hindu tradition. Nehru did not favor the term assimilation. His favorite word was integration. But the difference is more in semantics rather than in the actual content. Now, in contemporary India, how these tribes are being assimilated under the banner of Hindu Orientalism, I will give you just one example. There is an institute called Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences in Odisha. 30,000 tribal students are enrolled there, and the politician who runs it, his name is Achut Samanta, who is a Hindu politician, and he described tribal way of living as primitive. Therefore, the aim of this Kalinga Institute of Social Science is to bring them or make them civilized because they are primitive. And the banner under which this act of civilizing takes place is the nation/Hinduism. Now, many of these Adivasis, as many studies have shown, they also joined Hindutva platform. They also took part in planned violence against Christians and Muslims. Okay. Now, coming towards the end of my talk, so what I've done until now is this. I described why Hindu Orientalism as a concept is important, because ideas advance through invention and making of new concepts. And then I described what is Orientalism for Edward Said. From there, I moved to Wael Hallaq's intervention and his concept of Israeli Orientalism, in relation to which I developed my own idea of Hindu Orientalism. And then I, through two examples, through the subject of Islam and Muslims, and then through the subject of Adivasis or tribes, I described to you how Hindu Orientalism works. Okay, so these were the two short case studies. Now, I would suggest that you have to look at the working, operation, and practices of Hindu Orientalism in other fields, in literature. So, Bachchan Sharma Ugr, who was born in 1900, he was a Hindi writer. His literary output is another example of Hindu Orientalism. Bachchan thought that the idea of homosexuality in literature was introduced by Muslims. Okay, he also wrote a short story which is called Chocolate. So this is one example in literature. Another one, those of you who would read or who know Arvind Adiga's The White Tiger, or recently Majumdar's A Burning, a novel. In different ways, these are examples of Hindu Orientalism. So this is one side which I name as literature. In popular culture, if you take Bollywood films, okay, now in the last 25, 30 years, of course, all the villains are terrorists, and how that the figure of terrorism or terrorist is tied to Islam and Muslims. This is simply obvious. But before that, what is missed and not acknowledged is that the figure of Tawaif will be associated with Islam and Muslims, and that is another register of Hindu Orientalism. In foreign policy, and just a second, in the film, those who know the area of film studies, there is a genre which is called Muslim social. So for example, films like Nikah, it is placed under the category called Muslim social films, but you do not have any category which is called Hindu social. Okay, so one is led to ask why there is a special category called Muslim social. I would suggest that this is another operation of Hindu Orientalism. In foreign policy, you will see what is in the last 10 years or so, a discourse of civilizationalism. So the India is described as an ancient civilization. So when you say ancient, actually you are trying to eliminate what is the medieval or the Muslims past, and therefore the emphasis on ancientness of civilization. Look East India policy, because then it is towards Thailand, Sri Lanka, China, because the idea is that Indian civilization and culture is spread through these parts, including Bali in Indonesia. In domestic policy and politics, of course, you have citizenship law, lynching, elimination of Article 370, the discourse of love jihad, and there are intervention from the Supreme, from different courts also. I would suggest to you that you should think about the operation of Hindu Orientalism also in the arena of what might be called acoustic Hindu Orientalism, about sound. Okay, there is also, by the way, visual landscape. If you walk in the cities, if you walk in the public space, the Hindu Orientalism will stare you in the face. What I mean by acoustic Hindu Orientalism, that there are calls to ban azan. So even the sound is problematic. But of course, in such calls to ban azan, there is no mention of the sound of kirtan. Okay, in languages, in political language, and this is not exclusive to the current dispensation, you will see term like Hindu Taliban, Tughlaqi Farman, Rahul Gandhi being described as Shahzada, not Yuvraj. The point is, Hindi has a word called Yuvraj. But why don't you use the word Yuvraj to describe Rahul Gandhi? Why do you call him Shahzada? Because the evil character is to be identified with Islam and Muslims. Manmohan Singh's government was described as Delhi Sultanate. Okay. Now, Christophe Jaffrelot, who is a political scientist, he wrote a piece which was apparently critical of Modi. And then he describes Modi's rule as sultanist. This is a rank Orientalism, because sultanist, this is a term that Jafrelov borrows from Weber, and Weber is one of the rank Orientalists, because this sultanist, he was comparing different forms of polity, and he took patrimonial estate as something which is opposed to rational bureaucratic estate, and sultanist is the term that Weber uses. So this word is enmeshed in Orientalism. Jafrelov uses that word to describe Modi without saying anything about Orientalism of Max Weber. I would say that Javed Akhtar or Ashish Nandi, they are also example of rank Hindu Orientalism practices. After the so-called riots in Delhi, Ashish Nandi said that this was from both sides. Okay, so this is a story of both sides. This is the anti-Muslim pogrom which took place in Delhi. Irfan Habib is also, in my view, Edward Said, whose intervention in Orientalism is so important. Edward Said objected to the use of the term Mohammedanism, because before the onset of the Western power, Muslims did not describe themselves as Mohammedan. Okay, this is a Christian term to describe Muslims as Mohammedan. So Edward Said objects to this term as it has been used by Orientalists. Irfan Habib jumps in, and by the way, the title of Irfan Habib's essay is called In Defense of Orientalism. And he says that there is nothing wrong in using the word Mohammedan or Mohammedanism. If those of you who are interested, we can talk about it later. So, this is how Hindu Orientalism operates in academic as well as political language. The final point I want to make about our culinary practices, food. Now, in India, it is very common, your friends will ask you, or if you go to a restaurant, oh, are you veg or non-veg? Okay, would you prefer veg or non-veg? Now, of course, this is also this idea of division of food into veg and non-veg. It is not a natural thing. If you look at the culinary practices of other cultures, okay, they do not divide food into veg and non-veg. In India, it is not simply a division of food into these two categories, but as something which is so naturalized. Okay, other cultures have not. This is a Brahminical way of looking at food. Alternatively, I just propose in a provocative way, rather than saying veg and non-veg, you could also say, oh, are you, do you like meat or non-meat? But we don't say that, okay? So we have to ask, why do you say veg and non-veg rather than meat and non-meat, or rice and non-rice? When I was teaching in Australia, you see, I had many students who were from Vietnam. And in Vietnam, this is a rice-oriented culinary practice. So in Vietnam, if you have to ask someone, have you taken meal or have you taken your dinner? You know, what is it they ask? Have you taken rice? So rice becomes coterminous with meal, or rice becomes coterminous with meal. So my point is this, that the division of or the dominant categorization of veg and non-veg is not something innocent. It reflects a particular conception of culture and religion. If you look at the terms that are used for neighborhoods, Nizamuddin is described as Muslim majority neighborhood. Guardian described Jamia as a Muslim majority university. Okay, but you don't define Defense Colony as a Hindu majority colony. or you do not describe Hindu Banaras University as a Hindu majority university. And this is done by Guardian. Okay. So if you want to be really logical, then you have to do the same thing. But the question is why we do it in one case but not in another. Now, according to a report which was released by Lok Niti and CSDS, every second police officer in India thinks that Muslims are naturally prone towards committing crime. Every second police officer thinks that Muslims are naturally prone towards committing crime. Now, so to conclude, the first point is this, that if we really want to understand, both in academic terms as well as popular terms, the Indian power configuration, I propose that Hindu Orientalism is fundamental to comprehending our present condition as well as the condition of past. And I suggest to you that Hindu Orientalism is not something which is just in text. It is so powerful that it informs almost every day or every domain of our life, ranging from food, politics, academia, Bollywood, police, judiciary. And I have shown that this is not something accidental. Rather, it is a mechanism of working of a knowledge power matrix, a matrix which is operative from colonial era until now, but it has been rarely identified before as I do. And this knowledge power matrix is neither purely Indian nor entirely Western, but it is born out of an interaction between the West and India over a long period of modern history. If I want to use an academic term, this is longue durée. Without an alternative to this knowledge power matrix, which differently informs all parties, and it exists across the divide of liberal versus nationalist or secularist, feminist, Marxist, unless we recognize this presence of this knowledge power matrix across all these political and intellectual divide, it is my contention that we can have neither true freedom nor genuine democracy. So that is where I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfan Saab. Thank you very much for your detailed views on the Hindu Orientalism. Now let's hear Professor Amarjit Singh for the concluding remarks, and after that we will come for the question answer session. Okay. Amarjit Singh साहब कहाँ आप हैं? Please. अमृतजीत सिंह साहब. I think कहाँ है भाई? आप तो मौजूद हैं.
हाँ, can you hear me now?
जी बिल्कुल.
Can you see me?
I can.
No, your camera is not turned on.
Please turn on your camera.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. First of all, sorry I joined a few minutes late, but fortunate Irfan Saab had read your essay, Recognizing Hindu Orientalism. And I mean, in a way, throughout that essay, you keep apologizing about your need for more detail, which is not possible in that short space. So I'll take that up and say that you have offered a very rich array of perspectives, of details, histories, theorization. It's not possible to respond in a satisfactory way, as you felt about both Edward Said, whose definition is complicated and shifting sometimes, and also about your responses to Alok's book, Hindu Orientalism. I mean, for example, I can start with what you were saying at the end. While people in Eastern India would say You had your rice? Bhat khaya. In Punjab, we say roti khai. We don't say bhat. We don't say rice. Aapne roti kha liya? Roti is stands for dinner or a meal. So there are those kinds of distinctions and complications. But overall, my response to your formulation, I always like to ask that if we are theorizing, how do we benefit from that theorizing? First of all, of course, you know, we academics are in the business of going into the depths of knowledge, and we hope that some of it would translate into the knowledge of people who are not academic creatures like us. It's easy for non-academic creatures to run their mouth on what we do and without offering any legitimate responses, criticize us. But I am definitely an admirer of Saeed, and I'm glad you introduced me to Talak's book and your own work. And but you know, I want to raise a question that would be of interest to the non-academic audience here to some extent. We have terms like you know, the white supremacy in the United States, and that term can be compared with Brahmanism in the Indian context. You use that. We have the historical documents that are implicated in this whole debate and this whole knowledge formation. We cannot leave out Savarkar's pamphlet Hindutva, 1923. But you were going back to William Watts. There's always this linguistic educational complement that comes from 1835, Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education. You can't leave that out, right? So, so my Islamophobia is all over the world. That's become a huge practice, a huge movement. And of course, you know, I had a white American friend, very well-meaning friend. He says, Amrit, what you are dealing with is that despite all the militant RSS stuff in India, most of the people around the world think of Hindus as very peaceful people, vegetarian people, nice people, despite the fact that even Hindutva has infected so many South Asian communities in the United States and Canada and UK. You see examples of that everywhere. And on the other hand, the imagery, the stereotyping associated with Muslim populations, despite plenty of evidence to the contrary, is that this is a community, world community, global community, which is restless, which is violent, which is dangerous. We are dealing with that huge problem worldwide, and that is being exploited. In the situation within India, particularly, we have latched on to the narratives of partition. And we have persuaded a large section of the so-called Hindu population that Muslims were, first of all, responsible for the partition, which they were not. The British were determined to leave the country partition, as they did in every part of the world where they ruled. Jinnah became an agency to get it done and get it tied to the Muslims. And then the narratives about the horrible violence that took place in 1947 and how many people were displaced, 1 million people killed, 10, 12 million people displaced. My family was one of those. We moved from Rawalpindi, which is Pakistan, next to Islamabad, to the Indian side of the border. Nobody seems to remember, and you have to constantly remind people that the violence was on all sides, that there was just horrible violence perpetrated by Muslims against Hindus and Sikhs, and by Hindus and Sikhs against Muslims. Even though in places in Punjab and Haryana and a few places elsewhere, but mostly places between Delhi and Amritsar, a lot of our families were living in what we called vacuum properties. We knew that some Muslim family that left these properties behind. My own family was a beneficiary of moving into a large house after living for a few years in what was essentially slum.
जी जरा सा conclude जरा जल्दी कर दीजिए ताकि और question answer में भी कुछ time रहे.
वो बात ठीक है. But I wanted to really get to this question first of all is how is it that if we use words like majoritarianism, if we use critical race theory, which is under attack in the United States, in the Indian context, if we use the notions of Hindu supremacy, if we use things like Hindutva and Islamophobia, what does your theorization of Hindu Orientalism contribute that is valuable? And the second most important question, especially Razi wants me to get quickly to it, what I want to say, how do you work in the, because look at India, Muslims are the largest minority population. They are 14%. They are 200 million people. That is, I always like to remind whenever I speak, that's about 8 times the population of Australia. That is more than 6 times the population of Canada. That is about 3 times the population of Germany, right? And then you have minorities who are practically invisible now, Jains and Buddhists and Jews and Parsis. But you have 2 significant groups other than Muslims, the Christians and the Sikhs. Christians, probably 3.5% of the population, Sikhs about 2%. How do you work these 2 populations, the Sikhs and the Christians, into your theorizing of Hindu Orientalism or Hindutva, which is another way of addressing this creature that we are not able to calm down or redirect. It looks like it's moving all in a direction like a 500-mile speed bullet train, because we don't have bullet trains. We like to think of ourselves in competition with places like South Korea and China and Japan. But all we are producing are these horrible Hindutva bullet trains. We are not producing the bullet trains that China is putting up. So I think I have more, but I'll just stop with that. You have a chance briefly to respond so we can get a few more questions. I know there are many people in the audience who have read your essay, and they will probably join us in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you, Dr. Singh, and thank you very much. And we will come to question and answer session. Just let me announce it for the coming Saturday. We will have Andaz-e-Bayan from Aligarh Muslim University Arts Education, Cultural Education Center. They are going to present an evening of ghazal and other songs. And then we will have another continuity with the coming other 2 sessions from Aligarh. Thank you all. And now over to Dr. Hussain, who will be moderating the other section for question and answer. And let me apologize that since I have to catch the flight and I have to go, so Dr. Rafat Hussain and Faisal Beg, our co-host, will take care of the rest question and answer session. And thank you all very much.
Mr. Shahid Siddiqui has a question already.
Yeah.
Yes.
So moderator is Dr. Rafat Hussain. He's going to take care of this. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Razi Saab. Have a
Thank
safe
you. Thank you.
safe
Thank you.
travel.
Thank you,
Thank you
Razi
very
bhai.
much.
Thank you, Razi bhai. As Razi bhai said,
Thank you.
that the question and answer session is open now. So you can either raise the digital hand or show your interest in the chat box. So the first person in that line is Shais.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rafat Saab, and thank you, Razi Bhai, for giving this opportunity to listen to Dr. Irfan and his student Nihal and Ilhan, and also Dr. Amarjit Singh. Thank you so much. I think it's very remarkable that this Hindu Orientalism has been addressed. But to correct the historical thing that Dr. Irfan mentioned about the William Watts and the Battle of Plassey of 1750, I think Al-Biruni, almost several hundred years before that, came to India and defined something about Hindus and India. And that already demarcates what the Hindu society he saw and he observed. So I think Dr. Irfan is more aware because he's a scientist in that discipline. He might sort of give comments on that. But my basic question or basic notion is that having lived in Japan for 15 years, I realized that this is a very natural thing when there is a community that feels that they have to preserve themselves and they allow these names or definitions to define who they are versus others. So to see others as somebody who is not eating rice or not eating bhat or movies or other things, it's just a simple thing to define who you are. And I think Hindus also have tried that, starting from, let's say, Vivekananda or Raj Mohan Rai. But this continuation and assertion from Nehru's discovery of India to what Modi says in 2014, these are all a continuation of defining of who they are and what they wish to be. And it's a very natural phenomena. I mean, in Germany, you can see, in Japan, you can see, in the US, you can see, and now the current thing which is happening in Israel, in the Middle East war. So this is something which is very natural, and it has to happen. By calling it Orientalism and all that, it sort of just limits itself. So I want to thank Professor Irfan for very insightful presentation. But my comment is it's a sort of very natural thing all over the world in all cultures. I mean, Australia, he has been to Monash, Aboriginals and the Australian immigrants. So these things are widespread and all over. And as Dr. Singh also mentioned that, you know, even the partition created this nuance of the differences and all that. But if you look deeply, then both sides commit their own Orientalism. Thank you so much.
Professor Irfan Ahmad.
Rafat Saab, I will just quickly respond.
Yeah, please.
But before I respond, I just wanted to note that I'm very grateful and honored that my unofficial teacher, Professor Talal Asad, he has also joined.
Oh, great.
This conversation. So it is really a privilege for me. Those of you who have read the essay would know my debt. And it's not just for this essay, but for much of my thinking and how it is indebted to his own insight. So, okay, with this remark, now Professor Amarjit Singh, I think of the many comments I want to address two. And the substantial one, if I understood you, is this, which is about you had 2 points, that what is it that we get out of it in terms of effect or in terms of doing something in practice. That is number 1 point. And then the second point is why call it Hindu Orientalism? Okay, how it will connect to the critical race theory, or probably you also suggested that rather than calling it Hindu Orientalism, another term would be something analogous to white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
So can we also use, or shouldn't we use, and if we do not, then why it is the reason of not calling it Hindu supremacy, right? So anyway, I cannot address all of the rich comments that you gave, but I will
And
just...
then I had the question about the Sikhs and the Christians.
Yes, and Sikhs and the Christians. So just to address these 2 points, I think one fundamental aim of my intervention is that first we have to recognize that there is a problem in our thinking. The existing vocabulary is not sufficient or adequate to make sense of the reality, which is the present as well as the past. Okay? Unless we understand, unless we recognize that there is a problem, because the exact terms or the concept we use, that will come later. Okay? So first we have to recognize that our vocabulary is out of sync with the reality, with the world that we inhabit. Now, my main point is that we have to recognize this. Now, once we recognize it, of course, the question is whether term A, term B, or term C, right? But my key intervention here is that I'm describing a concrete historical, social, political, and cultural phenomenon. And I'm open to the suggestion that, okay, let's not call it Hindu Orientalism. Let's call it B. Let's call it XYZ. I'm open to it. But the contention is that we have to recognize it. Okay? Without this...
I have no problem. I would just... I have no
Right.
problem with the use of Hindu Orientalism. My
Right.
point, Irfan, is what does it contribute that Brahminism or Hindu supremacy or majoritarianism does not help us to understand?
Right.
When we move from those terms, which are more accessible to academics and non-academics,
Right.
we're also losing the possibility of extending this new knowledge formation to
Right.
many more people than just academics.
Right.
You see where I'm coming from? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So my summation here is that, for example, Hindutva as a term, okay?
Yeah.
So that also does a work, okay? So why not call it Hindutva, and why call it Hindu Orientalism?
Yeah.
The reason is the following.
Yeah.
If you see the history of the term Hindutva,
Yeah.
it is about 100 years old terms.
Yeah.
And then it is in ways more than one, but not exclusively.
Yeah.
It is tied primarily to the democratic politics. Okay, what I'm trying to suggest is that the way I use the term Hindu Orientalism, it is also informed, and it also is informed by democracy. But when we take the starting point, okay, because as you know,
As Sheldon Pollock does, yeah.
right. So Hindutva historically it captures the span of last 100 years. Hindu Orientalism, it takes you to further back, and also not simply about politics or democratic politics, because in any case, in 18th century, we do not have any idea of democratic politics. Okay, so what is deemed as something non-political, and this was the reason why I brought I mentioned Raja Ram Mohan Rai, because he's considered as something, okay, he's interested in Indian Renaissance, which is a cultural kind of thing. What I'm saying, the concept Hindu Orientalism, unlike Hindutva, it allows you to capture a more broader span of time and also beyond this arena of party politics to something which is capable of integrating and shedding light on culture, politics, language, religion, and so on. So this is not a full answer to your question, but at least one way of addressing it. Now, when it comes to the question of Christians and Sikhs, so what I can say at this moment, because one will have to do some more work, okay? But since I have not done it, but I'm planning. So at the moment, what I can say is that this assimilationist policy of Hindu Orientalism that I have showed towards Adivasis, okay? I can think of at least one or two examples which is equally applicable to the case of Sikhs.
Yeah, they keep trying that. They keep trying to manipulate the Sikhs into Hindutva history. Yeah.
Right. And one key example is not to even recognize not to even recognize Sikhism as autonomous independent religion, but simply a version. And that is where I would connect it the way I theorize it, because T.N. Tirlokinath Madan is a famous sociologist, but it is not just to him. He describes religion in two categories: outsider religion, insider religion, host religion, and then what is the opposite of host? I
Guest.
forget.
Guest religion.
Guest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and Shyama Charan Dubey, he uses indigenous and intrusive religion. Okay. Now, what happens? Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Hinduism, it is described as indigenous religion. Okay. Christianity, Islam.
That's what Savarkar did. Yeah.
Right. Christianity and Islam is described as outsider. Now, this is a classic example of Orientalism, because the key question would be that how do Sikhs themselves view their religion? Of course, it grew on the soil of India. That is not the point, but the valuation or the signification that you give, okay, to the term insider and outsider. My general position is I grew up. I was a teenager when the anti-Babri Masjid movement began. And one of the key slogans of that movement, which was so threatening and humiliating, Babar ke aulado Hindustan choro, the progeny of Babar, leave Hindustan.
Yeah.
I think my submission is that in more than one ways, it is not a question of some people being Babar ki aulad and some people not being Babar ki aulad. All of us, in some ways, are Bahar ki aulad. We all come from somewhere, because the nation state is a 19th century idea. Once you draw the boundary, it creates insider versus outsiders. So in some ways, we are all. You see, if you go to southern part of Spain, there is a gypsy community. And the first time when I saw their entire attire and dress, it resembles the tribal practices in Rajasthan. And there is a theory that part of these gypsies, they have come from India. So the movement contacts.
So Irfan Saab, please wrap it up. We have to move for other questions. We have plenty of them.
There are plenty of other questions here.
Yeah. So next one is Anuruddha Shah, please go ahead, unmute yourself. And Anuruddha Shah.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I am I am a youth from Bangladesh. So my question is a little bit amateur, but I am a little bit confused as the other youths. As we know, there are a good and bad side in every religion from neutral point of view. And what's the meaning of religion? Is that just to blindly follow a god, or to change our life? I want to know your answer or your perceptions from two professors. Thank you.
Okay, why not we take a couple more questions?
Okay. So they may not be related, but I'm going to
Yeah.
try.
Yeah.
So there was one from Ahmad Saab, and I think you have partially addressed that, but let's see if you wanted to add anything. How is the concept? I think he means Hindu Orientalism different from Hindutva, the Hindu political ideology. Do you want to add anything, Irfan Saab, or you think you have addressed enough?
Yeah, I think in response to Professor Singh's query, I think we already addressed that question.
Yeah.
So maybe we can take up.
Okay, so let's move on. Next is from Tanbir. And I wanted to know about the interactions between Hindu Orientalism with perennialism of Dr. Ananda Kumaraswamy. Any reflection?
Perennialism. Yeah, you refer to it, Irfan, in the context of Sheldon Pollock. I would also see what that connection you see. Hindu Orientalism and perennialism.
Yes.
Maybe you can address that.
Yeah, please go ahead and address, then I will come to the other questions.
I think I'll have to do some reading on perennialism. I think at this moment, I'll probably not address
it looks like Pollock also uses that term.
Okay, so
you quoted Pollock.
Right.
Singh Saab,
refer to perennialism.
okay.
It's not just coming from the other source that mentioned.
But as far as my memory goes, in the source where I quote and draw from Sheldon Pollock.
Yeah.
Let's
go to other questions. The question from the friend in Bangladesh, it'll take a long time to talk about the
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though the answer may be very long, but in the interest of time, you have to be very short, and you can talk one-on-one with the person if he is interested to know the details.
Sure.
So
I
anyway,
think we should go through other questions.
Qazi Muhammad. In India, some groups hosted and promoted cow urine drinking party to treat coronavirus that many researchers say did more harm to health. Would you see this as an indigenous resistance to Western epidemic prescriptions, or rather Hindu Orientalism ideology by the Hindu elites?
The short answer is definitely it is anything but resistance.
It's a very extreme form of Hindu Orientalism. Obviously, there are less what's the word? I'm trying to be careful. There are less disorienting examples than that. So I think it's not worth commenting on it any further. Yeah.
Okay. So Mirza Musharraf or Musarraf, in post-Godra Indian scenario and the recent uprise of communalism, is it appropriate enough to label incidents of Muslim killings for trivial reasons as a case of Hindu Orientalism? Isn't it more than this? So he has another question.
So,
and second question. Let me finish.
Hear the second question also, Irfan.
Yeah, let me finish, please.
Yeah.
Second question is how to address the narrativization of minorities in stereotypes apart from popular terms like imperial, collaborationist, or native informants. So I stop here, and then I wanted to please address the Mirza Saab's both questions.
Rafat Saab, can you reread the first question?
Okay, sure. In post-Godra Indian scenario and the recent uprise of communalism, is it appropriate enough to label incidents of Muslim killings for trivial reasons as a case of Hindu Orientalism? Is it more than this, or is simply a Hindu Orientalism?
Irfan, do you mind if I say something? I was going to say that it's true, you know, for example, towards the end of your talk, you were giving examples because the subject is complex. There's such a range of things. I think this question pivots the need for more selectivity in the examples you give in developing the case for Hindu Orientalism. But you may
say
yeah.
to Mirza Sahab, I think that the first word in his question itself is violent. When you use the word post-Godara, okay, it is not an innocent term. It is just like, so those of you who might be familiar with Jürgen Habermas, he recently gave a statement about operation by Hamas, okay? And he begins the story, his starting point is October 7, okay? And then he reacts to what has happened afterwards. And he says that it is all justifiable. Now, the point is the term post-Godara, okay, is already so deeply political because it already has a justification that whatever happened afterwards, it happened because of Godara. Okay? Yeah. So the privileging of Godara at the center of thing, post-Godara, okay? Now, there is all fiction. We do not have any evidence to say that actually Muslims set the train on fire. Okay?
The electrical problem in the car, yeah.
Right? But then it works as a justification, and this is unsaid, that Muslims set the fire, and then what happened was, as you know, the Newton's law and, you know, action, reaction, and so on. So I would suggest that terms like these, post-Godara, these are classic example of Hindu Orientalism because it is inbuilt on this binary opposition which I described at the center of Orientalism, namely that Hindus are generally peace-loving and Muslims are, by their very religion or certain assumed specificity of Islam, prone towards violence. Okay? So
I'm sorry, sir. Actually, I have mentioned this word only to say that the severity of atrocities, or we can say lives of Muslims in post 9/11 world or post Godhra Indian society, it is not like anything to cut or periodize from the middle or modern or the recent one. This is just only to say about the severity of actions or against the Muslims, not anything else.
Right, but Mr. Mirza, what I'm saying, it is the term post-Godhra, it is not just a term. Okay.
Okay, sir, I got your point, sir. I got, but I use it only to make a sense about the severity of actions headed against the Muslims.
Yeah, so I mean, all I can say is I think if people or scholars or activists, if they see some merits in the use of the term, insofar as it makes sense of the social reality, I, as an individual, of course, do not know everything, right? So
yes, sir, pardon.
So
I'm sorry for that. It was not clear from my end. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mirza Sahab, you can write him directly and get a clarification.
So
let's
just
move
a second.
Let's move on. Please move.
Yeah,
on.
let's move on. So another comment, or you can say question, is Jamshed Uppal Sahab. And he's saying, isn't this about how one social group demonizes the other using language and media? Orientalism is more specific to how West looked and put down Orientals, but happens, for example, by doing it to the blacks or the native. It says yes or no type of question. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, Irfan Saab. Yeah.
Yeah. So see, this was probably also a point made by Shah Siddiqui Saab earlier, that this is natural and widespread. I think this is, this is a problem in Edward Said himself, when he says that I don't have Orientalism in front of me, so I cannot give you the exact quote. But he does say that every culture has this this mechanism of self-other distinction. That might be true, but from there, we cannot jump to the conclusion that this binary kind of thing or creation of other, okay, it operates in every culture in the same way, and we cannot justify it on the idea that, oh, it is a natural thing. I think, of course, people do differentiate themselves from others, but then we have to see that differentiation, what is the power operation behind that differentiation? Because it is not simply differentiation, but differentiation which is hooked, which is aimed at achieving a particular political, which is aimed at installing or destabilizing or dismantling a particular social political formation. I do not think that every form of othering has the same power as the one which is modern and one which is backed up by international configuration of power. The logic that, oh, every group does, in anthropology, if you know, and this is also true for like every tribe thinks that it is superior to another tribe, okay? And that way they had this mechanism of differentiating or even considering themselves superior to other tribes. Now, even if we recognize this, then it doesn't mean that the kind of sheer destruction and violence that the modern social power has, okay, is at work in the case of that pre-modern tribal formation, and therefore it cannot be equalized.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. And there are 3 comments from Satynath Saab, Satynath Chaudhary, and from Ishita. They are long comments, so you can read yourself.
Yeah, Satynath is basically expressing an opinion. There's no
yes, I know. Those are the comments and opinion. That's why they are not questions. Unless any one of them, Satynath, Ishita, or Rakesh Saab, wanted to ask a question, I give an opportunity. So please go ahead. Otherwise, we move on.
Yeah, formulate a sharp question for.
Yeah, because these are long and I don't want to read those. These are rather comments than the questions. So Nazir Ahmad Saab raised the hand and I see probably he left, or because I don't see him here. Nazir Ahmad Saab. He is still there. Go ahead, Nazir Saab.
Yes. Thank you, Irfan Sahab, for this brilliant exposition of semantic anthropology. I knew a little bit about Edward Said. He was influenced by my good friend Iqbal Ahmad at Cornell in the 50s and 60s. And the term binary polarity was invented by Iqbal Ahmad. And the second thing is that there's also the influence of Ali Shariati in the late 60s and the early 70s, wherein he talked about the confluence of religion, money, and politics, which you have condensed into power and knowledge. Brilliant. The comment that I'd like to make is that the contribution that you have made is that language and words have meaning and power, and they're formative and normative in terms of culture, politics, and religion. And they have an enormous impact on modern society, as you rightly pointed out, because of the power of state and the power of the media and what they have wrought, as we see in Palestine at the present time. So I just wanted to say that you made a brilliant contribution. We have to be cognizant of what these words mean and what this Orientalism has done to modern culture and modern life and modern politics, and be ready to either coin alternate words or offer alternatives so that in a discourse, we engage in some kind of a reasonable understanding between different cultures. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazir Saab, for your compliments and comment. Let's, do you want to address anything, Irfan Saab, or this was rather a comment?
Thank you to Nazir Saab, and his point is quite valid, and I'm thankful to him. The only thing I could say was, of course, Iqbal Ahmad, and I have also been reading him, not simply because originally he hailed from Jahanabad, which is a place in Bihar. And his writing has been very influential in terms of anti-imperial thinking. So thank you.
And he was my personal friend.
Thank you. So the next question is from Irfan from University of Massachusetts. To my understanding, Said's Orientalism discourse refer to intellectual resistance. What is your suggestion to combat Hindu Orientalism? What is your suggestion to combat?
How to combat Hindu Orientalism? Yeah.
I mean, once we recognize the source of this knowledge power axis, okay? And my point is that since it is so pervasive, it works in academia. Now, let me say this. Once I submitted an article to American Ethnologist. An American Ethnologist is the flagship journal of American Anthropological Association. And this was sent to 6 reviewers. And the first reviewer writes, the first sentence is that this article is anti-Modi. Okay? Now, I don't understand. This is an academic article which I am submitting to American Ethnologist. And the reviewer says that this article is anti-Modi. Now, the point is, an article has to be assessed based on whether it is anti-Modi or pro-Modi. No, that is not the point. But you also see how this influence operates in the peer reviewing system. So it is in academia, it is in Bollywood films, it is in everyday language. I gave you this example that why Nizamuddin is described as a Muslim majority area, but defense colony is never called a Hindu majority area. So it has many frontiers, it has many sides. And I think a resistance will naturally mean that once we recognize the connection, so it is not a solitary thing, these are interdependent, interconnected things. And we have to, I don't have an offhand formula, but the key point is that once we recognize the interdependent dense network, that recognition will tell us, and we have to do it, by the way, collectively, not individually, right? So the recognition and identification of the sources of domination and power configuration have to be done before we make a concrete step about how to resist it.
Thank you. And I think there is nothing more. And I want everyone to read the Abdul Jabbar's comment. It's very conciliatory and philosophical comment. So you should look at it. And I don't have any...
Can I jump in for briefly?
Yeah, please.
Can
Go
you
ahead.
open the my video?
We can.
Yeah, let me.
I want to be seen.
Okay.
I don't want to hide.
How come your video
It's not-
allow?
It says I cannot open it.
Okay, I'm making you co-host. Maybe you can do that.
No, that's okay. No, I mean,
Also, what's
Try
up?
now.
All right.
Comment is worth
okay.
reading.
So I got it. I got it. Okay. It's a great presentation, discussions, and I think being a biologist, I learned quite a bit in this forum. Today, it was the case. In terms of, the academic, Dr. Singh was clear in terms of what is the implication, translational implications of academic pursuit like this. So there's an important question, but at the same time, the academics have to explore the past or the present. Having said that, so what we are at this stage, I came to the US 43 years ago, but I'm still very attached to what happens to India. So given the current situation, political, thing, how do you see how the people are going? People have to work together. There's about 220 million Muslims in India, so they're not going anywhere. They are going to be there. So how do you really create a system that really accommodates all every aspects of human experience? Thank you. If you can briefly talk about it, anthropologists, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Right. You see, if you're a biologist, I would like to mention this. One of my teachers, Yogendra Singh, he used to use this term called orthogenetic and heterogenetic. Okay, so in biology, and I will have to check. Heterogenetic is something from outside. Is that correct, Professor Jabbar?
Not really. Not really.
Which one is
heterogeneity?
Let's not go deep into the. I did my bachelor's genetics, but I don't want to.
Anyway,
yeah.
So there are two terms, homogeneous and heterogeneous.
Yeah, I think it's more of a different.
Homogeneous.
So heterogeneous is from outside, right?
No, not
Combination
really.
of combination two from different sources, I think, so that's
okay. I checked that word in Oxford English Dictionary. I don't have my essay in front of me, otherwise I would have given
anyway, that's fine.
But the key point is the externalization of Islam and Christianity is based on the idea, because there's biology, there is an organism and a virus or something which is harmful and which affects your body from outside.
Yeah.
Okay. And that term is used to describe Islam and Christianity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And
in Indian context. Because
Indian context, in France, you can say the people coming from outside are not are heterogeneous to the society of India. That's probably you mean.
No, this is not my view. What I'm saying is that a famous sociologist called Yogendra Singh, this is how he described Islam and Christianity as a force, and he uses this biological term, which means that a self or an organism gets, it is like affected by the attack from the virus outside. And Islam and Christianity, they are described as a virus from outside. Okay, as opposed to something which is indigenous. Okay, now this is a side comment. As for your larger question, how do one sees? Again, I don't think I'm a futurist. Okay, so I don't have a special eye into the future. I'm simply a student of history and philosophy and thought. What I can say with lot of certainty. That you see, there is a term in India which is described as very harmful, or it is considered as dangerous. But actually, I love that term with slight change. Now, what do I mean by this? There is something called an anti-national. Okay, so this is one term which is being used to describe the enemy of India. So it is ANTI. And I think the current crisis, not simply India, because the question of religious diversity, the question of linguistic pluralism, the question of tribal modes of life, okay, this is an immense diversity which is not simply in India, but it is in many countries. It is there in the Middle East, you know. Now, anti-national is a pejorative term. I use the word ANTE, before nation, okay? Now, what we see here, the Savarkarite vision is a deeply nationalistic vision. What I mean by anti-national, anti-ANT, before nation. So whether it is the Mughal Empire or the Ottoman Empire, it is the era of immense diversity of religion, culture, of languages. Now, what the nation state aims to do is to make things homogeneous. One nation, one state, one language, one religion. And that is where I think the source of violence resides. So if we have to really find a vocabulary or think about how we can deal with, because this is what I think, Jabbar Sahab, your question is about living together, not by denying the differences, but by recognizing it. Because, of course, all of us are not the same, you know. There are people who make this argument, people like us, that is okay, but we should not be thinking that everyone is like us. There are recognizable marked differences. So in that sense, I think the nationalistic discourse is about homogeneity, continuity, which is imagined, right? Anti-national is about deep differences. And this is a consciousness or mode of life which existed prior to the rise of monochromatic, highly homogenizing, and therefore inherently violent idea of nationalism. Unless we question it and try to think. So in another paper, I think I said Mirza Ghalib, he is at the time of 1857 rebellion. You have the formation of Indian National Congress in 1885. By that time, Ghalib is dead. So he has a sense of idea of being Indian, but that Indian is still not nationalist. The way it would become, not even 1885, but probably from early 20th century. So if we have to really imagine a future, then we have to really go back to we all should be actually trying or nurturing our capacity to become anti-national, ANTE. And that to me is one way to address our encompassing.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Professor, is there time for me to add a comment?
Bob, we are left with only 1 minute. Please go ahead.
Just quickly, it comes from the good question asked and Irfan's response. I think what is and that also addresses what we can do. What has happened is in India particularly, but it's going on in the United States and other places too. How we kind of impose a kind of a single identity on a huge community. Hindus throughout India are not the same. There are so many variations. Ayers and Iyengars barely talk to each other. They won't marry between each other. So the project here with the Hindutva is to try to impose a single Hindu identity. Same thing, trying to talk about some single Muslim identity which doesn't exist, and then try to demonize it. The Muslim communities within India, Muslim communities throughout the world have a lot of distinctive features. They are not all the same. So this, I think Nehru does a good job. He's for good reasons, particularly hated, because in Discovery of India, he uses my favorite word, palimpsest. He talks about the three layerings of the Indian civilization: the Sanskrit layering, the Persian layering, and then the English layering. And he talks about the impossibility of kind of separating those elements. And we are now in the process of destroying that palimpsest culture and convincing people that the Hindus are the victims and the minorities are enjoying some huge privileges. And Mr. Trump in the United States would like to do the same, convincing white people that immigrants are a problem, minorities are a problem, women are a problem, transgender people are a problem, gay people are a problem. So I think that may be a good way to kind of look at this question.
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah.
So before I finish the question and conclude the question and answer session, I personally, on behalf of Dr. Raziuddin, like to thank Professor Irfan Ahmad, Miss Ilham Ibrahim, and of course Professor Amarjit Singh. And in the end, I would like to thank the audience for their insightful comments and the question. That's what makes the session interesting. And thank you everyone once again. And that concludes and my apology if I forgot or didn't take any question in the comments, because there were so long comments. I may have missed someone's comment. So my sincere apology for that. Thank you so much. And that concludes the session.
Irfan Saab, once again, a wonderful presentation.
Yes,
A lot
indeed.
of thought to hear. Yeah, for all of us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rafat Saab. Thank you, Professor Amarjit Singh, and to audience. It was lovely to have this interaction with you, and hopefully see you on other occasion.
Yeah, sure. We will invite you again when you write a new paper. Thank you.
Or join us and give us a hard time. Even if you don't have to present.
Thank you, Irfan sir.